Not to bring back, but to wipe them out.
That's the plan. You have my word on it.
All right, I'm in.
That will be all.
God damn it, that's not all!
She was told she had no talent. She nearly walked away from acting. And when she finally got her big break, it almost broke her. On the set of Alien, Sigourney Weaver battled asthma attacks, toxic glue, and a studio that wanted her out. They didn't think a woman could lead a sci-fi blockbuster. She proved them all wrong. But behind the scenes, betrayal, sabotage, and a scene so shocking, no one on set saw it coming. And now, at 75, she's revealing the disturbing truths they tried to bury. This is the untold story of Sigourney Weaver and the nightmare behind Alien. Before Sigourney Weaver became the face of science fiction, she was just Susan, a quiet, awkward girl who felt like a stranger in her own skin. Born on October 8, 1949, into a family of giants in the entertainment world, she was surrounded by fame from the start. Her father, Pat Weaver, revolutionized television by creating The Today Show and The Tonight Show. Her mother, Elizabeth Inglis, was a British actress who starred in Alfred Hitchcock's The 39 Steps before giving it all up to raise a family. Even her godfather was Steve Allen, the first host of The Tonight Show. But despite her glamorous family, Sigourney always felt invisible. By 6th grade, she was already 5 feet 11 inches, towering over her classmates and even some of her teachers. Kids teased her mercilessly, calling her the giant spider. Feeling like an outsider, she found comfort in stories. At just 14 years old, she came across a minor character named Sigourney in The Great Gatsby, a name that sounded strong, mysterious, and different. She adopted it as her own. It wasn't just a name change. It was her way of rewriting who she was. Unlike many children of Hollywood elites, she didn't ride on her family's name. She went to Stanford University to study English literature, not acting. She lived in a treehouse with her boyfriend, wore elf costumes, played the flute, and distanced herself from the Hollywood world. Acting at that time felt silly to her, performative and trivial. But everything changed after a trip to Israel, where she worked on a kibbutz. There, surrounded by hard labor and quiet reflection, she realized what she missed most: storytelling. When she returned, she made the bold decision to pursue acting and applied to Yale School of Drama. But what awaited her there wasn't opportunity. It was humiliation, rejection, mockery, and emotional bruises would shape the woman who would one day stand alone against a xenomorph. But for now, she was still Susan, and no one believed she'd ever become Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney Weaver thought Yale School of Drama would be where she proved herself. Instead, it nearly broke her. From the moment she arrived, she found herself surrounded by towering talent. Meryl Streep, for one, seemed to get every good role. Weaver, meanwhile, was cast as grandmothers and old witches. Professors dismissed her. One even told her flat out, "You have no talent. You should leave." And yet something in her refused to quit. Every rejection became fuel. The more Yale tried to fit her into their mold, the more she broke it. Instead of begging for their approval, she found an unlikely ally in another outsider, playwright Christopher Durang. Together, they started writing and performing the weirdest plays Yale had ever seen. In one, Titanic, Weaver played a woman who stored live animals inside her body. In another, Das Lusitania Songspiel, she smashed champagne bottles while singing about capitalism. The critics at school were horrified. But something about her performances stuck with people. She was fearless, strange, unforgettable. For her final performance at Yale, instead of performing a serious classical monologue like everyone else, she did a piece about a woman seducing a refrigerator. Professors were insulted. They failed her. But Durang saw something no one else did and quietly passed her script to an agent. That one rebellious act launched her first off-Broadway role. Weaver was officially on the map, not because she followed the rules, but because she shattered them. The very school that told her she didn't belong accidentally forged one of the most important actresses in film history. She didn't just survive Yale, she escaped it with the tools she'd need to battle the most terrifying monster Hollywood had ever imagined. Before Alien, Sigourney Weaver was nobody in the world of film. Her first official movie role, just 6 seconds on screen in Annie Hall. No lines, no fanfare. She stood awkwardly in a trench coat next to Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. That was it. She later joked, "I made $50 and spent it on a sandwich." But that moment, as brief and forgettable as it seemed, would change everything. Juliet Taylor, the casting director for Annie Hall, never forgot the tall, striking woman who appeared in the background. Years later, when casting Ridley Scott's sci-fi thriller Alien, she remembered Sigourney. No one else was thinking of her. Studio executives floated big names like Meryl Streep and Glenn Close. Fox wanted someone known. But Ridley Scott had a vision. He didn't want a movie star. He wanted someone real. The original Alien script didn't specify Ripley's gender. Most drafts assumed the lead would be male. When the studio agreed to let Scott cast a woman, it was seen as a massive gamble. Audiences weren't used to seeing a female character who wasn't a victim or a love interest, especially not in horror or sci-fi. Weaver came in and shattered every expectation. She wasn't glamorous, she wasn't fragile, she was tough, commanding, and deeply human. Still, Fox was skeptical. They didn't believe audiences would accept a woman in charge. They offered her a fraction of her male co-stars' salaries. She was paid just $35,000. John Hurt made more than 7 times that. But she didn't care. She saw the potential in Ripley. She trained with ex-Marines to move like a soldier, learned how to operate heavy machinery, and delivered a performance that would become iconic. Audiences didn't just accept her. They loved her. And when the captain died halfway through the film, jaws dropped. This wasn't a damsel in distress. Ripley was a survivor, and Sigourney Weaver in that moment became a legend. What audiences saw in Alien was groundbreaking. What Sigourney Weaver experienced behind the scenes was grueling. The production was a nightmare. The sets, though beautifully designed, were suffocating. The corridors were narrow, built to mimic the inside of a spaceship, and packed with smoke machines that created an eerie, foggy atmosphere. But for Weaver, they became a health hazard. She had asthma, and the smoke triggered violent attacks. At one point, she nearly had to be pulled from the set. The now infamous chestburster scene, where John Hurt's character convulses as an alien erupts from his chest, wasn't fully explained to the cast. Ridley Scott wanted real reactions, so he didn't warn them how violent the scene would be, or how much fake blood would spray across the room. Veronica Cartwright, who played Lambert, was knocked back and covered in gore. Her scream, completely genuine. She wasn't acting. Weaver watched in horror as her co-stars recoiled in shock and disgust. For her, the scene marked a turning point. This wasn't just another movie. It was something more brutal, more raw, and more dangerous than she expected. The alien suit worn by Bolaji Badejo was just as difficult to deal with. It smelled terrible, made movement awkward, and had to be adjusted constantly. Badejo could barely breathe. The atmosphere on set was tense, hot, claustrophobic. Some days stretched over 16 hours in those dark corridors, and through it all, Weaver had to maintain Ripley's icy focus and strength. She often felt isolated, the only woman in a cast and crew dominated by men. She had to fight to be heard, to be seen as more than just the girl in the horror flick. But she didn't back down. She used that discomfort, that pressure, and turned it into fire. The kind of fire that made Ripley a legend, the kind of fire that made Alien unforgettable. When Alien hit theaters in 1979, no one expected what they saw. The leading man died halfway through. The monster wasn't just terrifying, it was unstoppable. And the last one standing wasn't a hero in shining armor. It was Ellen Ripley, played by a tall, intense, no-nonsense woman no one had heard of before. Sigourney Weaver had arrived, and she wasn't asking for permission. Audiences were stunned. Hollywood was confused. A female action lead who didn't cry, didn't beg to be saved, and didn't fall apart under pressure. Ripley was everything women in sci-fi films weren't allowed to be. Capable, strategic, fearless. She didn't just survive, she led, she outsmarted, and she destroyed the alien on her own terms. But even with Alien's success, Weaver didn't get the recognition she deserved. She wasn't offered major awards. She wasn't flooded with prestige scripts. What she got was typecasting, endless offers to play the tough woman, the fighter, the cold heroine. Hollywood saw her not as a versatile actress, but as a niche product. Weaver pushed back hard. She didn't want to spend her life playing the same role, so she made bold decisions. She turned down Total Recall, despite its huge budget and star-studded cast. She passed on The Silence of the Lambs, not because she didn't respect the script, but because she didn't want to become a brand. She wanted to be an artist. Instead, she took on complex, emotional roles that challenged her range. In The Ice Storm, she played a disillusioned suburban wife. In Death and the Maiden, she portrayed a woman confronting the man who tortured her. These weren't glamorous roles. They were emotionally violent, psychologically raw. And they proved what Yale never believed, that she could do anything. Still, no matter how far she strayed from Ripley, sci-fi kept calling, and soon she would return to the franchise that made her famous. But this time she would come with demands, and it would cost her dearly. When Sigourney Weaver agreed to return for Alien 3, she had one condition. It had to mean something. Ripley's story couldn't just be another cash grab. After surviving 2 xenomorph attacks and saving a child, Ripley had become more than a survivor. She was a symbol. If her journey was to continue, it had to be earned. The original idea for Alien 3 was haunting and strange, a wooden monastery planet inhabited by monks who believed Ripley was sent from God. The alien would be seen as divine punishment, a philosophical horror film about faith, isolation, and sacrifice. Fox green-lit it. Sets were built. It was bold and risky, and the studio hated it. Just 3 weeks before filming, the entire script was scrapped. Millions were already spent. Panicking, Fox shifted the story to a prison planet. What followed was chaos. Directors came and went. Writers were fired mid-script. Entire scenes were rewritten on the fly. David Fincher, a first-time director best known for music videos, was thrown into the fire. Weaver's power over Ripley had grown. She had script approval and insisted on a meaningful arc. She wanted Ripley to die at the end, especially after Fox killed off Newt and Hicks, the only family Ripley had left. She shaved her head, wore no makeup, and insisted on realism over glamour. But even that became a fight. The prosthetic glue used on her scalp triggered severe allergic reactions. She broke out in rashes. Filming was delayed. Fox wanted her to wear a wig. She refused. Then they stripped her of her co-producer credit in the trailers. A final insult. The death scene she fought to make meaningful was cheapened at the last minute when the studio forced the alien to burst from her chest as she fell into molten lead, a desperate attempt to copy Terminator 2's iconic ending. Weaver called it insulting. Fincher called the film a nightmare. He disowned it. Weaver defended him, saying there was greatness buried under the interference. But privately, she felt exhausted. Not just by the production, but by how Hollywood treated powerful women who wouldn't sit quietly. Ripley died in Alien 3, but the war behind the scenes nearly killed Sigourney's spirit, too. After the chaos of Alien 3, Sigourney Weaver was done. Ripley was gone, and she was fine with that. She had helped kill off her own character to give the story weight. But Hollywood doesn't let legends rest. In 1997, Fox came calling again, this time with an outrageous pitch. Ripley would return as a clone. Alien Resurrection was strange, even by sci-fi standards. Ripley 8 wasn't fully human. Scientists had resurrected her using old blood samples and merged her DNA with that of a xenomorph. She had acid blood, superhuman strength, and a strange psychic connection to the aliens. Weaver was intrigued. This wasn't Ripley. It was a distorted echo, something new. She embraced the weirdness. She studied predatory animals, changing how she moved, stalking, crouching, glaring with intensity. She improvised one of the movie's most talked about lines, "I'm the monster's mother." One moment she was cold and deadly, the next, mournful and lost. In a horrifying scene, Ripley 8 finds a lab of failed clones, twisted, moaning versions of herself. One begs her to kill it. She does. The movie itself was a chaotic blend of action, horror, and absurdity. One scene called for Weaver to throw a basketball over her shoulder, without looking, and sink it. The director planned to fake it with CGI. Weaver refused. She trained with an NBA coach for weeks. On the day of filming, she nailed the shot on the first take. The crew exploded. Ron Perlman broke character and yelled, "Holy expletive!" They had to cut the scene quickly to hide his reaction. But despite those flashes of brilliance, Resurrection wasn't well received. Critics called it bizarre. Fans were split. Weaver defended it, saying it was bold and different, but even she admitted the franchise had become something else entirely. Something less human. And that's why, when the studio pitched Alien vs. Predator, Weaver didn't just say no. She fought to make sure Ripley would never be reduced to a soulless action figure. By the early 2000s, the Alien franchise was no longer a groundbreaking saga. It had become a brand, one that Hollywood wanted to milk dry. So when 20th Century Fox announced Alien vs. Predator 2004, they expected Sigourney Weaver to return. But they didn't expect her to say no, and mean it. To Weaver, Alien vs. Predator was an insult, not just to her, but to Ripley. "It's like making Jaws fight Godzilla," she said bluntly in interviews. After 3 films and Ripley's sacrificial death, the idea of reviving her for a monster mashup felt like a betrayal. Ripley's story had meaning, she insisted. She died for something. I wasn't going to let them take that away for a few explosions and a bigger box office. Behind the scenes, she was furious. She had helped kill off Ripley in Alien 3 to avoid this exact situation, the character becoming a mascot for mindless sequels. Now, Fox was doing exactly what she feared. She even blamed AVP for ruining what could have been a powerful franchise rebirth under Ridley Scott. Scott had been quietly developing ideas for a proper continuation, one focused on origins, philosophy, and terror. AVP crushed those plans by turning the series into a cartoon. Fans were divided. Some missed Ripley and wanted her back in any form. But Weaver never budged. She said Ripley had become too important to be reduced to an action figure. And while Fox moved ahead without her, AVP was panned by critics. The violence was empty. The story, shallow. Ripley was nowhere, and her absence was felt. It was the first time Hollywood truly saw the cost of underestimating Sigourney Weaver. She had the power to say no, and more importantly, she had the principles to mean it. Though she turned her back on more Alien films, Sigourney Weaver never turned her back on Ripley. She just needed the right story, and surprisingly, it came in 2014 not from a studio, but from a game developer. Alien. Isolation wasn't a blockbuster film. It was a survival horror video game, and unlike recent sequels, it wasn't about guns or explosions. It was about fear, isolation, one human alone against an unstoppable alien force. Sound familiar? The story followed Amanda Ripley, Ellen's daughter, as she searched for answers about her mother's disappearance. The developers wanted it to feel like a lost chapter of the original Alien. And for that, they needed the real Ripley. They asked Sigourney Weaver to voice her character for a bonus mission that recreated scenes from the 1979 film. Everyone assumed she'd say no. Instead, she surprised them. She agreed, not because it was high-paying or high-profile, but because it respected Ripley. "This," she said, "is the sequel Alien 3 should have been." She reunited with the original cast to record authentic dialogue, lending the project an emotional weight few games ever achieve. Her voice, calm, commanding, vulnerable, brought Ripley back to life in a way fans hadn't seen in decades. Players were stunned. Critics raved. Suddenly, Ripley was relevant again. And this time, she wasn't owned by a studio. She wasn't distorted by executives. She belonged to the fans, to the story, to the woman who gave her life. It was a quiet victory. No red carpet, no Oscar buzz. But in that recording booth, Sigourney Weaver reclaimed Ripley on her terms. Now at 75, Sigourney Weaver has outlived the studio systems that once underestimated her and the franchises she helped build. But she isn't slowing down. She's still climbing cliffs, voicing aliens, doing her own stunts on Broadway and playing 14-year-old Na'vi in Avatar: The Way of Water. Yes, at 61, she played a teenager, and she made it work. She and director James Cameron worked for months to recapture teenage awkwardness. She read her old journals, she ran, swam, danced, and in one unscripted moment, she created a scene where Kiri, her character, bonds with glowing ocean creatures. It wasn't in the script. Cameron kept it in. Weaver has never chased fame. She married Jim Simpson in 1984. They've been together for over 40 years. Their daughter, Charlotte, is a non-binary professor at Columbia University focused on AI and digital storytelling. When people mention Alien to Charlotte, they shrug. "That goes in the little box of things I don't need to know," they once said. Sigourney laughs about it. She raised her child the way she built her career. Free from expectations. She's still an activist too. She's fought for climate change, abortion rights, and conservation for decades. She even risked arrest during the Keystone Pipeline protests. In 2025, while performing The Tempest, climate protesters stormed the stage. The crowd booed, but Weaver stood with them. "Their message fits the play," she said calmly. "Let them speak." She never fought for the spotlight. She fought for integrity, for strength, for stories that mattered. And through it all, she never stopped being Ripley. Not the warrior with a flamethrower, but the woman who refused to be told who she could or couldn't be. In the end, Alien didn't just launch her career, it revealed who she truly was.
A survivor, a rebel, a legend.